As the wise say, a debate is but a kaleidoscope of ideas where we turn the wheel of perspective and discover new patterns of understanding. Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome. This is the 7th edition of the SASI debate, proudly brought to you by SAYWHAT and supported by the Swedish Embassy in Zimbabwe. My name is Mr. Jones, and I am your debate mistress. Joining me today on stage are 4 prestigious universities. Teams, please make yourselves known, starting from podium 1 all the way to podium 4.
I'm Andrew from Gwanda State University.
And I'm Chelsea from Gwanda State University.
I'm Sean from Chinhoyi University of Technology.
I'm Ropa Fadzo from Chinhoyi University of Technology.
I'm Michelle Gurure from Women's University in Africa.
I'm Pato Tanganyika from Women's University.
Kimbal Malima from University of Zimbabwe.
Salibonani Metembe Mtimkulu from the University of Zimbabwe.
Now that we are well acquainted, let the games begin. This debate will follow the British parliamentary style. The rules are, each person will be given exactly 4 minutes to present their case. Points of information are allowed. However, if your point of information has been declined, you have to wait for exactly 30 seconds before requesting for a second opportunity. With that being said, the motion reads: this House prefers environmental movements heavily prioritizing local agendas over global ones, e.g., focusing on local pollution rather than climate change. This House prefers environmental movements prioritizing local agendas over global ones, e.g., focusing on local pollution rather than climate change. The motion has been stated. Prime Minister, the ball is now in your court.
So what do we say when you say environmental movements, right? These are social movements that aim to protect the life of the natural world from environmental practices in order to create sustainable living, right? So now I would also like to emphasize on local agendas, which are voluntary processes of the local community consulting with the aim to create local policies and programs towards achieving sustainable development. And what are global agendas, right? Global agendas are, these are global goals which align with the SDGs, which are a universal call to end poverty, to protect the planet and ensure prosperity to all, right? So what am I saying when I say that environmental should, when we say environmental movements should heavily prioritize local agendas over global ones? Why should we prioritize local agendas over global ones? We are saying that they help us in making an immediate impact, right? This is where we say that local environmental issues have a more direct and immediate impact on communities, leading to quicker and more tangible results. For example, we talk about Kenya, right? Kenya was able to efficiently use its resources, which is the geothermal energy, to make the Okaria geothermal plant and to basically power itself. That was a local agenda, not a global one, guys. And then we also talk about how it was able to conserve its wildlife. Yes, it's also a part of the SDGs, right? It's also part of the aims, but we are saying that these local agendas also help us into achieving these SDGs, these global agendas, right? And we also talk about how we should address local pollution to improve health outcomes and economic productivity and quality of life more rapidly than global efforts, right? That's where we talk about Rwanda, when they were able to produce as a country, as a local community, to produce biodegradable plastics and ban non-biodegradable plastics, and also make sure that they have extensive reforestation on land, right? Then we also talk about how community engagement and ownership has helped in prioritizing local agendas over global ones. This is where we say that this foster great community involvement and ownership of environmental initiatives. For example, we talk about Ethiopia. Ethiopia was able to make a policy called the Green Legacy Initiative, where the community has to focus on their soil, their water conservation, and their reforestation, right? And they're also able to channel their water into making, they were also able to channel their water conservation schemes so that they can also power their country with hydropower, right? People are more likely to participate into these movements, and because they directly affect their lives, right? This is also where we talk about how SA was able to make renewable energy. When we talk about solar wind through producing the procurement program, national parks, right? And then we also talk about how we can tailor solutions into addressing.
And that was the Prime Minister stating her case. Up next, Leader of Opposition, please take center stage.
Good morning, everyone. In today's debate, I want us to look at two major issues: local environmental pollution versus global environmental pollution, right? Global movements in addressing climate change for the sake of this debate. Let's look at what are local environmental pollution issues, who is currently suffering the most from these local environmental pollution, why are they currently suffering from environmental pollution, and how can they leverage the opportunity to be a part of global movements in order to tackle their own local environmental pollution issues. So when you talk about local environmental pollution issues, we see that countries in the global south, or rather developing countries, are the ones that suffer the most from local environmental pollutions, where we see Zimbabwe unable to take care of issues such as we have waste dumps instead of landfills, instead of sanitary landfills, instead of incinerators, right? Where we see that most of the wastewater in African countries or developing countries is just put into surface water systems instead of being treated first before it can be put into surface water systems. So all of these are issues that are coming from the lack of finances, right? Most African countries, developing countries who actually suffer the most from pollution issues are suffering because they are unable to meet the demands, to meet the global standards, to meet the standards of treating waste, to meet the standards of dealing with local pollution issues, because they are financially unstable to do it, right? The budgets for most of these countries, they're focusing more on hunger issues rather than environmental pollution, which actually should be worked on, right? So how can they leverage the opportunity to work on their own issues by aligning with global movements? Global movements such as the clean water and access to sanitation, such as SDG number 6, climate action, right? All of these things which become funded by global entities, other developing countries, which are financially stable to fund it. We see the UN's work in so many African countries in ensuring clean water access for other countries. We see the UN's work in giving access to clean water. We see the dealing of pollution issues even at local level through climate action, through addressing issues such as climate action. So we realize that we can get more funding if we leverage the expertise, if we leverage the incentives that come with dealing or moving with global movements, such as getting access to clean water and climate change. Now let's look at climate action. Let's talk about who caused climate action, right? And who suffers the most from it, and how can the people that cause the climate problems that we are facing today, then become more involved in helping the countries that are actually suffering the most from it. We realize most of the issues or most of the disasters that we're going to face coming from climate disasters or the climate catastrophe are those of emissions that were put long ago, and we're going to suffer from them for the next 50 years. Climate action is not only about cleaner production technologies, it's also about disaster risk reduction, right? Where we see developing countries which now want to move away from global movements, separating themselves from the benefits of getting helped by the people that would have caused most of the problems, right? So we see better involvement in the countries that cause climate problems to help other countries, such as with disaster risk reduction, like I've said, where we talk about better buildings, more resilient buildings, where we talk about evacuation strategies and policies to help people. So in today's debate, we realize that we get a better approach, not only in addressing local environmental issues, but in addressing global environmental issues. We see more impact when we work together as a global nation. We see that even with the Montreal Protocol, when we realized, okay, what is causing the ozone layer depletion, right? When all of these countries actively work together, we then solve the issue of ozone layer depletion by the banning of so many things. We see better involvement from the countries that cause climate problems when we all work together, when they get to fund some of these things, right? We see that even if these African countries who suffer the most from pollution issues, who cannot treat their lead in water, who are unable to ensure plastic pollution, they cannot do it on their own because they don't have the funding for it. So in fact, we don't get to do anything. Thank you.
And that was the leader of opposition. Up next, Deputy Prime Minister, please take the floor.
All right, firstly, I would like to disagree with a few points that have been made by the opening opposition. The first of them being focusing on only South countries. We can't focus on people who are doing it bad. We can't focus on people who don't have enough. Let's focus on the North ones. Let's focus on the UK. Let's focus on the US because they have it. We have the solutions that they have used and we can copy them. In this case, copying is allowed. This is not high school. We can also talk about the emphasis on the inability for them to do this because they don't have the money. It's okay, we don't have the money, but so what? Pollution is still there. We need to solve it. And by having our own solutions, by having our own tailored solutions, we find better solutions that we can handle. If we don't have money, so what? We don't have money for the excavators. We pick the papers with our hands because that's what we have. Pollution is a problem which we need to solve. And also, who caused the pollution does not matter. It's probably ancestors that we don't even remember their names. So it doesn't matter anymore. We look at the problem that we have now. We need a solution, and Zimbabwe could work better if it works on its own instead of working with the Americans, because they have more money, which we don't have. Actually, creating more currencies is a sign of poverty. I am not dissing my country, but we don't have what they have. We need to use what we have now, and who causes it doesn't matter. Taking global solutions is slower because there are more formalities. You have to go to a lot of organizations. When I can just wake up today, go to my community, encourage people to clean, and then they will. Take him. Okay, we do not need a lot of money. What we need is ourselves. You do not need a lot of money to pick papers. You do not need a lot of money to bury them. Fine, burning them will release carbon, then bury them, hide them from the world. You solve pollution faster when you work together. Okay, now that said, I want to also add that environmental solutions are better worked together at a local stage because there is political feasibility. People are more likely to work on something if they are happy. For example, we have countries like Rwanda. Rwanda needs to solve the issues of the genocide more than they need to worry about pollution.
Point of information.
People are not going to listen if they are not happy. We have countries like Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe needs to solve the differences between the Shona-speaking people and the Ndebele-speaking people for them to accept each other and solve this pollution issue before they start worrying about carbon emission. They already don't have the money, so why worry about it? Point.
What do you think is a greater threat to humanity, pollution or climate change?
I think the greater threat is pollution, because pollution is the one that is bringing the climate change in the end. When you have the pollution, you have the carbon emissions because you're now burning it. So pollution is the greater threat. Now moving on, we also have economic benefits on these things. When you tailor your solutions to your own country, you create jobs for people who are in there. You create new companies, you have new organizations, and by that you improve the economy, which honestly is something that the southern countries need. Most developing countries are below the equator, and we need those things more than we need to solve the pollution. And by having our own solutions, the one that we make on our own, made for the people and by the people, people will accept them more than to use solutions that they don't understand from people that are out there. Another thing is, pollution heavens are not a bad thing. Yes, the UK has solved it better, the USA have solved it better. It's okay, they have done it. If we do it too, we catch up with them. In the end, pollution heavens benefit everyone. So it's okay to have local plans, to have local problems, because at the end of the day, the whole world still benefits from it. And we also have incremental change. When we focus on our own country, we get change in every aspect. When you focus on pollution in our own country, we get change in the whole country. It's no longer only about pollution. It's no longer only about the SDGs. Everyone benefits and people get to understand it. You can't take some prime minister's word from UK and use it in Zimbabwe. Let's use our own. Thank you.
That was the Deputy Prime Minister representing the opening government. Next up, Deputy Leader of Opposition, please take center stage.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My opening statement is going to be global problems require global solutions. Climate change, biodiversity loss, ocean pollution. These are all problems which the globe is currently facing, which cannot be solved by local agendas. As well as focusing on a heavy focus on local agendas can undermine all these global efforts into betterment of our world and people. Next, our global agenda means that we take care of the interconnectedness of all environmental issues with a focus on global efforts, tackling local problems as well. A tackling of climate change will also tackle the pollution faced by countries, especially developing countries in the global south. Developing countries in the global south have been mentioned constantly by my fellow leader of the opposition, because these are the countries which are suffering the most from the pollution which has come from their west, as well as developed countries. And the reason why we need to focus on global change is because these developing countries don't have the resources or the ability, capability, or power to drive and solve their own problems. With a focus on global changes, meaning that there is resource management, resource leveraging of data, meaning that they have the ability to make low effort, low cost, and high green technology, which can be shared with weaker countries which don't have the ability to make it. Next, resource allocation. Prioritizing local issues can lead to fragmentation of efforts and inefficient use of resources. As we said before, developing countries do not have the resources to fight. They don't have the resources to be able to dig. We can use a case study of Zimbabwe itself. Waste management is not happening, water sanitation is not happening as well. But if there's a global effort to come through and solve these problems, especially the SDGs, which is the one thing the globe has actually agreed on, showing that a global effort is more prioritized and more likely to work than a localized effort. One important thing we need to remember, humans are communal creatures. They were never meant to work alone. Moving on, economic and political influence. Economic and political influence cannot be gained with individual efforts, because individual efforts require countries, people, corporations, and people to work on their own to solve the issues which we have, such as pollution and more. But when you have global movements, they have the most important thing, which is the economic and political clout to be able to solve these problems, meaning not only do they have the money, but it's much easier to cross borders and solve the problems with resources being put together by governments working together. Basically, in a simplified term, all I'm saying is global efforts take a shorter time, unlike localized efforts, which require change in culture as well as training, which most countries might not be able to do with the limited amount of time and resources they have. Next, scalability and the best practices that can be followed. Global movements can promote best practices and scalability solutions, as well as they can provide a platform for sharing knowledge in the best way, leveraging data. Developed countries which have already gone through the issues of pollution have the ability to be able to share the data and use the information they have gained from their experiences to share with weaker other countries which are not able to deal with their pollution or climate change. As I said before at the start, global problems require global solutions. Now, with rebuttals to what the opening government had said, what they need to realize is that people do not pick up litter by themselves. People need money, people need incentives, and we need that resource to bring up people working together. Changing society, as I had said earlier, takes longer. And one important thing is that pollution is not limited to borders. It can easily cross to the next country. So we need to work as a united front.
We need to work as a united front. That was the Deputy Leader of Opposition making his case. Up next, Member of Government, please, the floor is yours.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I'm from the closing government. I'm supporting the notion that says this House prefers environmental movements heavily prioritizing local agendas over global balancing. First, I would like to ask, why are we having environmental movements? Simply because we have pollution, land degradation, and climate change. Well, I support the motion that we should have local agendas. Why? Because we have different grassroots. What am I saying? We have different reasons why we have pollution, climate change, and land degradation. For instance, we take a look at China. China does have issues of pollution, but why? It is because they have industrialization. But here in Zimbabwe, we're having issues of pollution. Why? Because we have a lot of litters that are being thrown by the people. Hence, we need to focus on the local agendas because we have different grassroots. Why should we focus on global agendas when the globals have their own issues that they are causing on their own? Proceeding, I would like to... No, thank you. I would like to bring forth another issue that is very important, especially in African countries. We prioritize our cultural relevance. When we focus on the cultural relevance as an individual, as a local government, as a local agenda, actually different countries have different cultures. If you prioritize your culture, then people can focus more on developing their own countries and changing things that they see that have problems. What am I saying? We have Zimbabwe. We believe that we have our own cultural beliefs, and in America they have their own cultural belief. If you work in hand with the cultural relevance of the country, hence you can...
Point of information.
No, thank you. Okay, I'm sorry. So another issue is, what I'm saying is we need to focus on the local agendas as we have different backgrounds on the causes of our own problems. Would like to also focus on the issue that they are more likely to be sustainable as you're working on a small scale. For example, you can work on Zimbabwe and change your own issues without involving the countries. Oh, as the opposing government has mentioned that we don't have resources, why depend on the countries that will later on take advantage and colonize us? We both know that Zimbabwe wanted help from Britain and later on we were colonized. Why do we need to develop a dependence syndrome? Because we need to work on environmental movement that we can simply do on our own as a local movement with our own pace. I would like to also bring forward information. No, thank you. I would like to also bring another issue of directly addressing issues also helps us to focus on issues that are affecting us more than issues that are affecting other countries more. Normally, the countries that you're saying we should depend on when it comes to resources are the same. They have their own problems and their own paces. If we address issues depending on the global ones, depending on the global movement or the sustainable development goals that they are using that you have mentioned, these countries are developed. Hence, they have low rate of poverty. If you talk about poverty and sustainable development goals as you have mentioned, hence they have their own priorities that they have, whilst we have our own priorities. In Zimbabwe, we're talking about land degradation, my fellow colleagues. We're not talking about pollution per se. We don't even have an ocean. Why should you focus on water pollution more when we don't even have big places where there is water? We can focus on a local government, on a local level, because we have small lakes and we can literally use what we have. And when it comes to, I would like to support what my opening government have mentioned, that we can pick papers. We don't need money to tell people to pick the papers, because people can collaborate, understand each other, aware them of the impacts that are caused by littering, and they can literally... Thank you.
Thank you so much to our Member of Government representing the closing government. Up next, let's welcome the Member of Opposition. Please take center stage.
Panel, the reality of the world is that environmental problems, they do not discriminate. What that means is that they affect us all. We think just in terms of ideology, we have a moral agency in terms of responding to issues that affect us as a globe. But secondly, if you put something here and nothing here, it falls. We think that the cases from the opening half fall in effect that, one, they lack like the setup and the context of this debate. What's very important here, one, you recognize that this motion is not debated in absolutes, particularly it says a priority, which means that on our side, you can still look at local agendas, but we think that there should be a bigger push that should be given to like these global things. But secondly, also global agenda doesn't mean like one size fits all. We think that to create a global framework which countries are going to interpret independently. We have seen this, for example, with Paris Agreement, where you say that everyone has to respond to the problem of climate action, but the way in which you respond to that, you can actually tailor it. We hate the characterization that says it's going to be all size fits all. We think that that's false. We're going to run basically a case on legitimacy. The case that was coming from opening government was mainly on efficacy, on why better solutions. We say that, in principle, we have a moral burden to respond to issues that pose a greater threat to humanity. The reason why particularly we say that, one, when you look at these global problems, there are problems that have a nature that they cannot be reversible, right? That is to say, for example, you cannot repair a torn ozone layer. But moreover, when you look at local problems, we think that these are problems that can be easily mitigated. So, for example, the problem of pollution, we think that it looks like you just actually engaging in cleanup campaigns, and we have a lot of that within Zimbabwe. We think that you ought to note that. So because these problems are of a nature that they generally are irreversible, we think that you have to give more focus on that. The second thing also here is that the decentralization under their side sort of makes it hard for us to actually hold people accountable, especially these individual governments in and of themselves. The reason and ideology here is to say that they can escape with just doing the bare minimum or not doing it all because of considerations such as cultural context that they actually tell us about. So that is to say that because you do not have a monitoring mechanism that is beyond these bodies, it's hard to actually hold them accountable if they do not commit to these agendas. We think that the likelihood also is that they are not going to fulfill these local agendas, given the fact that there's no one who is actually going to monitor them. Because we think that basically the way in which governments actually function is that they play politics of the ballots, that is, they prioritize policies that are most likely to get them into power again. So, for example, they'll prioritize welfare, etc., etc. So we think that on their side, at the very worst case scenario, that there's a neglect of these issues. But moreover, we think that a priority on global agendas creates indirect benefits for these local agendas or local movements. The response, particularly to global environmental issues, can create sort of a spillover to these local agendas. You will realize that the nature, particularly of global problems, has a huge impact on local problems. That is, in certain instances, for example, there is a political will to respond to these local problems, but then because there is an incapacity, so for example, stemming from the fact that there are global problems such as climate change, for one reality we haven't been able to get like returns from our agroeconomy in Zimbabwe because of issues such as climate change. So that means in and of itself, by impact, you mean that you incapacitate these local agendas insofar as you do not have resources. We think that when you prioritize global agendas such as responding to climate change, you then capacitate these countries to actually solve those local problems that actually affect them. So we have proven you in terms of the principle to say that even without considering consequences, we think that this is the right thing to do. I might be left with a few seconds in my speech, but we think that the world doesn't have time. We have to respond to climate issues. Thank you.
And that was the member of opposition stating his case. Up next, we have the government. Please take center stage.
Good morning to you, everyone. As the closing government, we prefer to focus on local agendas over global ones. As my fellow colleague said, we have certain resources that we have. We can use those, which will increase our empowerment and make us more capable to solve our own problems, rather than relying on other nations. Whereby in Zimbabwe, we have implemented certain policies, such as on the beginning of each and every month, there is National Cleaning Campaign Day, whereby people clean their own environments on their own, which means this will be very useful, as it will focus on us being capable of taking advantage of what we are capable of doing and put aside what we are not capable of doing. On the issue of cultural relevance, as my fellow colleague said, cultural relevance is actually important because people have a more contextual understanding of the problem at hand and how to address it from their own perspectives. In relation, in Zimbabwe, we have the Environmental Management Agency, which has actually been quite effective, whereby people have been told about issues such as deforestation and deforestation and other environmental hazards that can affect them. The EMA has put in place certain tariffs or certain fines that will address any perpetrator who goes against those regulations. This is actually highly useful, as it has addressed the cultural relevance of the nation and focused on a more local agenda over global agenda. Also, by focusing on local agenda, it will bring forth tailored solutions. This tailored solution will be quite useful and relevant to us.
So if you are giving examples that countries are already taking measures, so for example, picking up papers, but also EMA, should we give priority to something that already exists within status quo, or look at something that is entirely neglected?
I actually think if we look at something that is in our nation, it actually solves our problem, because we'll be looking at how far we've gone with this issue. Like how far has pollution been dealt with? Not like, because problems can never be solved there and there. It takes time. It's gradual. It's a process of solving a problem, especially these environmental issues. Moving on, when we're focusing on, as I was saying, tailored solutions will actually be more useful, as they will be focusing more on our side rather than anything else. Also, moving on, another thing we should take in consideration is how local agendas are likely to be more sustainable when implemented. Local agendas will be highly sustainable, as people will have participated in each and every process that took place within their country, having a better understanding of it. Unlike global agendas, you may ask a person from Zimbabwe, he can never know some people in rural areas do not know what's going on in the UK. If ask someone from Binga, he doesn't even know what SDGs are. So why should we implement those kinds of issues within Zimbabwe when some people don't even know the global issues that have been implemented? Rather, we should focus on local things that are tailored for our own solutions, which will cover a wider area within Zimbabwe. Also, we can look on collaboration. As my fellow colleague mentioned, how collaboration is essential when dealing with local agendas. When people talk about collaboration, when people seek to solve a problem within Zimbabwe, these problems will affect each and every Zimbabwean, meaning the Bele, Shona will all collaborate to solve that problem. I hope my case has been understood.
And And that was the government whip representing the closing government. Up next, opposition whip, please take center stage.
Panel, one thing that we need to understand in today's debate is that prioritizing global agendas does not necessarily mean that we are completely neglecting the local agendas of this environmental movement. What it simply means is that we're giving less priorities as compared to the global agendas, and this is why we are the winning team in today's debate. So what do we get from the opening government, right? The opening government comes to tell us that these local environmental threats have a more immediate and direct impact, right? And they also tell us about specific tailored approaches. What do we then come to tell you, panel? We tell you that when we talk about pollution, right, we tell that it is something that can be easily solved as a nation. It is something that countries already have procedures. For example, we said that Zimbabwe already has EMA that punishes people who do pollution. So what do we then say about that? We tell you that that is something that we would rather less prioritize as focused to problems that are more bigger than climate change. What do we then tell you about these more imminent threats? We say that climate change is a very imminent threat, is a very imminent threat because, for example, panel, you cannot address a local problem if you have not addressed global problems. For example, if Zimbabwe wants to introduce environmentally friendly techniques, the fact that we are agro-based, it means that our revenue is affected by the effects of climate change. So it then goes on to show that climate change has more imminent effects. Therefore, we cannot heavily prioritize local agendas over global ones. What do they then come to tell us? They tell us about the specific tailored approach. Panel, we tell you that our framework as a closing opposition clearly states that we are not completely neglecting these countries. We are coming with one big framework that gives these other nations the liberty to then come up and define what they then want to do as a country that best fits their problems and that is sensitive to their problems. So they can then define, but at the end of the day, we want to come up, we want to achieve one central goal. What do we then get from the opposition pages, right? We tell you that they come here and tell us that there's some countries that value their culture when it comes to conserving the environment. What does this then do in today's debate? It gives the governments of these countries, of these local countries, to then say that they cannot be focusing on some environmental practices because of cultural reasons. So it gives them a leeway to come up with excuses of focusing on these issues that affect each and every individual in the world. What do we then tell you as a side closing opposition? We tell you that these climate change problems do not discriminate. They affect everyone. Therefore, each and every person in the world has to contribute something for this panel. What do we then come to tell you again, panel? We tell you that we then hold people accountable if we have global frameworks that then guide countries on what to do because they have targets and they know what they're supposed to do. What does it then say to these local governments? It means that these local governments can then choose to do whatever they want if we prioritize them. But then we can hold them accountable when it comes to prioritizing global agendas. And that is why we win this debate, panel. What do we then tell you? We tell you that, panel, two things to note, right? Firstly, we say that we're giving these countries the liberty to then choose and decide what works for them, but under one spectrum, under one global framework, right? Secondly, we tell you that everyone is affected, therefore we then prioritize or we then value a world where everyone contributes something to these climate change problems.
The greatest weapon against injustice is not a sword, but a voice. We've heard a voice from the opening government and closing government, opening opposition and closing opposition. With that having been said, we'll allow this time for the judges to deliberate. While they do that, podium one, hello. How are you?
We are doing great.
Do you think the judges are going to deliberate in your favor?
I don't know, we can say we've crossed the line.
You've crossed the line.
Let's wait on them.
Wait on them. I like that. Very diplomatic. Hello, ma'am. How are you? I'm well, thanks. Welcome.
Yeah, good.
How are you feeling about this debate?
I'm a little nervous.
Very nervous.
Very
Even now?
Yeah, now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you think the judges are going to deliberate in your favor?
Yeah, I think as a team, we worked on something.
You worked on something.
Yeah.
I like the team effort. Moving on to podium 2. Hello, ma'am.
Hi.
And welcome back.
Thank you.
How are you feeling?
I'm okay.
Are you okay?
Yeah,
You're okay.
I'm okay.
What are you studying?
Sorry?
What are you studying?
I'm studying environmental engineering. So I
Okay.
heard all the lies.
Okay. That was a good one. All right, so as an environmental engineer, do you like the side of the debate that you find yourself on?
Yeah, I think both sides of the debate are important for us to talk about. I think that, like we already talked about, how the interconnected nature of how when we solve local problems, we solve global problems. But then local pollution problems are actually quite serious, and we also have irreversible ones too.
Mm-hmm.
Like when we look at things like lead in water and how it affects the brain and how IQ is lowered for so many countries. And when we look at issues like who suffers the most, I mean, when you go to America, you barely see a paper on the ground because everyone there recycling is good. So I think both sides of the debate are good sides of the debate to debate, but then you just then weigh what's more important to you, because both sides die at the end of the day.
Both sides die at the end of the day. That is very true. Sir, how are you?
Feeling good.
Are you also an engineer?
No, I'm a chemist.
Oh, wow. This is interesting. Tell us more.
About what specifically?
Your chemistry and the topic, do you think?
Yeah, I would say I like the position we're on. And bringing into my chemistry side, it's a fun debate. I've always loved environmental chemistry.
Okay.
Something which brings concerns of the world into light and allows us to work on everything. So I most definitely enjoy this debate.
Oh, that's amazing. And do you think the solutions that we have been offering are actually implementable?
Yes, they're quite implementable indeed. On both ends, as some sort of mix of both local and global efforts, I guess. Having local efforts, things like changing culture, pick up paper, recycling, water sanitation. And then global efforts working on climate change, banning of CFCs, microplastics and the like.
Right.
Yes.
Very knowledgeable. I like that.
As well as pharmaceuticals, yes,
Okay,
affecting our water.
All right. The chemist has spoken. Now moving on to podium 3. Hello, ma'am. How are you?
Hello, how are you?
I'm well. How are you feeling today?
Well, I have mixed emotions.
Okay.
Exactly. Attending this is my first time.
Wow.
And also, it's not easy to be on camera, you know that. You're on spotlight and you have to say something that's applicable and something that's reasonable and that's realistic. Yeah.
But you did well. How are you feeling towards the topic itself?
Well, I would like to appreciate the fact that I was on the side of local agendas, because I really appreciate minding our own business. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think we should focus more on our local. Focusing on others or maybe including others. Look what happened to us before.
Yes.
We had to undergo a colonization because we had to depend on Britain.
Okay.
You understand? So depending on others is a risk on its own. We both know that.
Okay. All right. Moving on to podium 4. How are you? Podium 4.
We could be better.
You could be better. Why?
Yes, we're feeling a bit anxious. But yeah, I think there's always that debate to it with every debate. Yeah.
All right. Okay. I like that. And do you feel like you did justice to the motion as well?
We can't be sure on that until the adjudicators tell us. But I think, yeah, it was a fair approach that we took from our side, recognizing that even if you look with international law, I think the stance is, for example, with the Paris Agreement, is that usually there's a broader framework that is used by countries, but then also it's balanced with other principles. So for one, there's an idea of common but differentiated responsibilities. So we all have a common goal in terms of responding to these problems, but then we understand also, like, from their concerns that there are different capacities and responsibilities that we have. So I think, yeah, it was a fair approach that we took from our side.
I like that. I like that. The motion has been set, the debaters have debated, and now it's time to leave this time for the adjudicators to give us their final verdict.
Thank you so much for the debate. So I'll just start with the call. So in first, we gave it to closing opposition. Second, we gave it to opening opposition. Third, we gave it to opening government. And fourth, we gave it to closing government. So we felt it was a very good debate in essence, but we gave the call on the following ideas and on the matter that was discussed. So I think the team that won, the team that we gave first closing opposition, best characterized the motion and showed us where we ought to have been debating on. It wasn't an issue of whether localized pollution is something that we should focus on or whether we should promote global ones, but rather on the issue of preference. They gave us a clear understanding as to why there's a moral urgency. They give us a clear understanding as to why climate change, particularly in its nature, is irreversible as opposed to pollution. So that in and of itself was the winning argument to show as well there's a greater urgency and a moral need for us to put preference on global desires, because that then leads to a better world, and it has mitigating factors and it has indirect benefits that accrue to society. And that we felt was something that we brought more into the debate as opposed to others. Why does opening opposition come second and not first? Is we get more or less the same things that we get from closing opposition, but you don't arrive at the same conclusions that closing opposition does. So you tell us, well, we need to leverage global funding to mitigate climate degradation. We need to have climate action so that we have disaster risk reduction. We need to have, there's inefficiency through fragmented policies. But we don't necessarily get to the conclusions as to why those fragmented policies are going to be problematic for the long term or for a greater stakeholder. And we think that in terms of your scalability, to show us why scalability through promoting global initiatives is something that is preferable than focusing on individual or localized issues. So on a matter of showing us issues to do why preference ought to be there, we thought these guys showed us more urgency and they showed us more preference and arrived at better conclusions than you guys did. Why these guys come third and not fourth and not first or second? We felt like you sort of missed the debate. As opening government, your duty is to show us, for example, if you look at this motion, this House prefers environmental movements to heavily prioritizing local agendas over global ones. The major issue is the preference. Right? So show us why we ought to prefer local issues as opposed to global issues. Why that then tackles to do with the issues that you're talking about in the issue to do with local agendas having an immediate result as opposed to global ones. Why then that should be a preference in arriving at those conclusions similarly to what closing opposition did in the debate. We felt also disingenuous in the debate to come and say, well, we think we don't have money, so what? We think we don't necessarily are not the causes of the pollution, so we shouldn't really focus. We think that was disingenuous in the debate when these guys come in and show us that, well, we think it is important for us to leverage our funds and to leverage the global community to attack an issue that is predominant within the whole context of the world. And these guys give us greater characterization to show us that it is an immediate concern because of the irreversible nature of climate change as opposed to pollution. The fact that you characterize pollution as picking up litter, and then when we then counter it in terms of the whole debate and showing where there's greater need, picking up litter as opposed to climate issues that then affect agriculture and all of those things. We felt that then, in essence, can't rank you above them and also can't rank you above them. Why you guys come in fourth? We felt like you provide the least in the debate in terms of the matter that we ought to be discussing. When you just come in and say grassroots, 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 it doesn't necessarily advance the debate. We need to hear why localized agendas, as they explain, are something that we should prefer, one, but also why global agendas are problematic to the extent that we ought not to prefer them. The debate also was generally not about whether global ones or local pollution is wrong or bad, but whether or not we should put a preference over one thing. And that was what we needed to hear from the debate, and we didn't get. But other than that, it was an amazing debate, and we wish you luck in the other rounds. Hear, hear.
And that brings us to the end of our debate. Thank you to our judges and well done to our participants. With that being said, this is the SASI Debate, Speak and Solve Initiative. My name is Ms. Jones. Thank you so much for joining us. Until next time, goodbye.